James sat in the cramped airplane seat, gazing out of the window as the city lights below flickered like tiny stars in the distance. The flight was nearing its descent, and a feeling of unease began to creep into his chest. He had been away for 3 long weeks, working tirelessly on a project that seemed never-ending. The meetings had blurred together, the presentations and emails had piled up. But through it all, one thought had kept him going. Lily, his wife. The woman he loved with every fiber of his being. The woman who had patiently supported him through the chaos of his career and had always been there to share in the small joys of life. The woman who, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, had started to feel distant in recent months. At least, that's what he had noticed in the brief moments of clarity between work and exhaustion. As the plane lowered, he mentally prepared himself for the reunion he had dreamed of. He would surprise her with flowers, a candlelit dinner, and a weekend getaway. It was time to make things right. He had been so caught up in work, focusing on advancing his career, that he had unintentionally let the connection with his wife fade. But now, he was determined to reconnect. He just needed to get home, look into her eyes, and hold her the way he used to. His excitement, however, was tainted by an undercurrent of doubt. The phone calls had become shorter over the last few weeks. Lily's once effervescent voice seemed tinged with weariness, even when she spoke about their plans. The laughs that once flowed so easily between them had turned into polite exchanges. James had dismissed the nagging feeling, telling himself it was just the stress of daily life. She was just tired, he reasoned. They both were. As the airplane touched down, he breathed a sigh of relief, feeling a wave of anticipation wash over him. It had been far too long since he had held her, far too long since they had shared quiet moments together. But now, that would change. He would show her how much he cared, how much he appreciated everything she did. He could make it all better. Car ride home was surreal. Each street sign passing by like a marker on the journey back to something that had once been simple, something that now felt slightly out of reach. The drive seemed longer than usual, and the more he thought about it, the more his mind replayed the small cracks that had appeared in their relationship over the past year. Lily had always been the heart of their home, the warmth that filled, the spaces between the walls, the laughter that echoed through the rooms. But lately, she seemed to carry a sadness he couldn't pinpoint. She had stopped telling him about her day with the same enthusiasm. She no longer asked about his work with the same curiosity. James had assumed it was just a phase, the kind of dip that happened when life became overwhelming. He had been busy, yes, but they would get back on track, he told himself. They always did. As he parked the car in the driveway, James took a deep breath and smiled. It was time. He quickly grabbed the bouquet of lilies he had picked out for her, stepping out of the car with a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't wait to see her face when he walked through that door. He unlocked the front door, expecting the familiar greeting he had missed. But instead, there was nothing. The silence hit him like a weight in his chest. The house, usually filled with warmth and life, seemed oddly still. The light in the hallway was dimmed, casting long shadows on the walls. James set the flowers down on the side table and called out her name. No answer. His heart began to beat faster. A small thread of unease threading its way through him. He called again, louder this time, as he made his way down the hallway. The silence pressed in on him, an unspoken tension that he couldn't shake. When he reached the living room, he stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The room was exactly as he had left it before he left for the trip, neat, untouched. But something was wrong. The little details that usually brought him comfort. The half-empty coffee cup on the table, the throw pillow she liked to hug while watching TV, were missing. There was no trace of her presence. His stomach tightened, and a sense of dread began to grow. Something wasn't right. He quickly moved toward their bedroom, the thudding of his heart loud in his ears. The door creaked open, and James's eyes scanned the room. The bed was made. The clothes she usually left scattered across the floor were nowhere to be seen. Her side of the closet was empty. Panic began to creep into his thoughts, but he tried to keep it at bay. She had to be here. She had to be. His mind raced, searching for a reason. Maybe she had stepped out for a moment. Maybe she was just running late. But then, as if summoned by his desperate thoughts, he saw it. An envelope on the bed. His name was written in her delicate handwriting, the ink smooth and even, but it sent a chill through him. The world seemed to stop as James reached for the envelope. The anticipation he had felt just moments ago, now replaced with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. He tore open the envelope, his hands trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and as he read the words, his world unraveled. James, I'm sorry. I couldn't wait any longer. I found someone who could give me what I needed. This isn't your fault. I just couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Please understand. The words blurred in front of him as the weight of them pressed down on his chest. He had been so sure, so convinced that everything would be okay. But now, standing in the silence of their home, he was faced with a truth that shattered everything. James sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the letter in his hands. His mind raced, but his body remained still, like a man caught in the middle of a storm he couldn't escape. The words on the page danced in front of his eyes, too painful to be real, yet undeniable in their presence. I found someone who could give me what I needed. The letter seemed to burn in his hands, as if the ink had been etched into the very paper by a force beyond his understanding. His vision blurred, his mind unable to grasp the enormity of what he was reading. The woman he loved, the woman he had promised to cherish, had left him. And worse, she had found someone else. He stood slowly, the weight of the letter pulling at his every movement. He couldn't stay in the room anymore. It felt like a tomb, empty, silent, and cold. The bed they had shared for years now felt like a foreign place, a reminder of what had been and what he had lost. With the letter still clutched in his hand, James wandered through the house, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. He went into the kitchen where they had shared so many meals, so many quiet mornings over coffee. But now the countertops were bare, the dishes untouched. The vibrant life that once filled this home seemed to have vanished without a trace. His thoughts turned inward as he made his way through the living room. Where did it all go wrong? The question lingered in his mind, unanswered. He thought back to the weeks leading up to this moment, trying to pinpoint the exact moment everything began to unravel. But the more he thought about it, the less clear the answers became. Was it when he had been consumed by work, the late nights and the constant pressure to succeed? He had always prided himself on providing for Lily, on building a future for them both. But had that desire to succeed come at the cost of their connection? Had he sacrificed their intimacy, their conversations, the very essence of their love, in pursuit of something that now seemed so insignificant? As his mind spiraled, a voice inside him screamed, "You should have seen this coming." It was there, in the quiet moments, the subtle changes in her voice, the way her eyes seemed to drift away when he spoke about the future. He had noticed it all, but he had chosen to ignore it. He had convinced himself it was just stress, just a phase. But now, staring at the empty walls of their home, he realized that the cracks had been there all along, waiting to widen into the chasm that now lay between them. James walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. It was a beautiful evening, the sun casting a warm glow across the neighborhood. He had always loved this time of day, the stillness, the sense of peace that seemed to settle over everything. But now, it felt like a mockery. The world outside continued on, oblivious to the devastation that had just unfolded within the walls of his home. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling as he glanced at the screen. It was a text message from his colleague, asking about the status of a report he had promised to send before his return. For a moment, he stared at the screen, the words seeming to come from a different reality. He was no longer in the world of work, of deadlines and meetings. He was in a world that had been ripped apart, a world where the person he trusted the most had walked away without a second glance. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and paced the room. He needed answers. He needed to understand why she had left him. But no matter how many times he asked himself the question, no answers came. Only more questions. Only the silence. It was then that he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A framed photo on the mantel above the fireplace. It was a picture of Lily and him, taken during a vacation they had taken to the beach 2 years ago. They were smiling, arms around each other, their faces glowing with happiness. The love in their eyes was undeniable. James stared at the photo, for a long time, his chest tightening. He reached up to touch the glass, but as his fingers brushed against it, something inside him broke. Was that love still there? He wondered. Or was it all a lie? Suddenly, everything felt wrong. The house felt wrong. The empty spaces where Lily's presence had once been felt suffocating. The photos on the wall, the trinkets on the shelf, they no longer held the same meaning. They were relics of a past that no longer existed. A past that, with a single decision, Lily had left behind. James sank to the floor, his hands pressed to his face as the tears finally came. The weight of the letter, of the betrayal, of the loss. He couldn't carry it anymore. He had spent so long building a future for them, for their family, and now it had crumbled in an instant. And for the first time, James realized the harsh truth. No matter how hard he tried, he could not make her stay. In the silence of their home, surrounded by the echoes of what once was, James faced the raw, undeniable truth. She was gone. And no matter how much he wanted to fix it, no matter how much he longed to go back to the way things were, He had to face the reality that some things, once broken, could never be put back together. The morning after James had discovered the letter, the house was still. The silence that had haunted him the night before seemed even more deafening now. The weight of it pressed down on him, threatening to suffocate him in his own home. Lily was gone, but her absence was felt in every corner of the house, in every little thing that reminded him of her. The scent of her perfume on the pillow, the shoes she had left by the door, the coffee mugs they had always used. Everything seemed to mock him, as if the house itself was a living memory of what they had lost. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared so many mornings together. The letter lay before him, its words still haunting him, still echoing in his mind. I found someone who could give me what I needed. The phrase repeated like a mantra, over and over, its meaning cutting deeper with each repetition. What did it mean? What was it that she needed that he couldn't provide? The questions spiraled in his mind, making it impossible to focus. He had tried so hard, worked so tirelessly, to give her everything he thought she wanted. He had been driven by the belief that providing for her, securing a stable future for them both, would be enough. But now, it felt like everything he had worked for, everything they had been built on a foundation of assumptions. Assumptions about what she needed, assumptions about what she wanted, assumptions about their love. His phone buzzed again, snapping him from his spiraling thoughts. This time, it was Lily. The sudden appearance of her name on his screen sent a shock through his body, and for a moment, he froze. He had not expected her to contact him, not after what had happened. She had left him without a word, without a trace. So why now? His fingers hovered over the screen, and after what felt like an eternity, he tapped the screen and answered. James, I didn't think you'd call. Lily's voice came through, soft, distant. There was a layer of sadness in her tone, a quiet sorrow that spoke volumes without saying much at all. I didn't know what to do, James replied, his voice raw, cracking under the weight of emotion. Where are you, Lily? What happened? Why did you leave me like this? There was a long pause on the other end, as if she was gathering her thoughts, trying to figure out what to say. The silence was unbearable, and James felt as if the space between them had grown even wider, even though they were only a phone call apart. Finally, Lily spoke, but her words seemed weighed down by something he couldn't quite understand. I don't know how to explain this, James. I didn't want to hurt you. I really didn't. But I couldn't keep living the way I was. I felt so empty, so lost. James felt a pang of frustration. Empty? Lost? You had everything. You had me. You had everything we worked for. I thought I did, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like myself. I stopped feeling like I mattered. I thought that if I gave more of myself to you, I'd lose who I was. And I did. James's heart clenched as the words sank in. He had always known that their lives had become more about survival than living, more about making it through the days than truly connecting. But hearing it from her, hearing her admit it so plainly made it feel so much more real. She had been drowning, and he had been so blind to it. I never saw it, James whispered, more to himself than to her. I didn't see you slipping. away. I didn't see how hard you were trying to hold on, and how much I was pulling away without even realizing it. Lily's voice cracked. It wasn't just you, James. It wasn't your fault. I couldn't ask you for what I needed because I didn't even know what that was anymore. I was so wrapped up in my own pain that I didn't know how to tell you I was dying inside. The words hit James like a physical blow. He had thought it was his failure, that he had been too focused on his career, too absent, too consumed by his own desires. But now he understood. It wasn't just his fault. They had both been living in their own silos, trying to hold on to something that had already started to crumble beneath them. The walls they had built around themselves were invisible but impenetrable. I never knew it was this bad, James said, his voice trembling. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought if I worked harder, provided more, it would be enough. I thought I could fix it. I never thought you'd feel like this. I know, Lily responded quietly. And I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I was so scared of losing myself, scared of losing you, that I made choices without thinking. I thought it would be easier this way. Her words were a revelation, a painful, gut-wrenching truth. She hadn't just left him for someone else. She had left to save herself from a life where she had disappeared into the shadows of their marriage. She had chosen to walk away because, in her eyes, staying would have meant losing everything that made her who she was. James didn't know how to respond. He felt like a part of him had just been ripped open, raw and vulnerable. The realization was too much to bear. He had been so sure, so convinced that he could fix everything by working harder, by providing more. But the truth was, he hadn't even seen her struggle, hadn't noticed the quiet desperation in her eyes. And now it was too late. I don't know what to do anymore, Lily, he confessed, his voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know where we go from here. Lily was silent for a moment, and then she spoke softly, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. I don't know either, James. But I can't keep pretending. I need time. I need to find myself again. And I think you do too. The words hung in the air like a fragile thread, stretching between them, connecting them despite the chasm that had grown between them. James didn't know what the future held, but he understood now that the road ahead wasn't about fixing the past. It was about healing, about finding a way to rebuild, not just their marriage, but themselves. And for the first time, he felt the painful but necessary truth. They both needed to heal. James had never realized how deeply silence could settle in a house. He had always thought of it as comforting, the quiet moments spent together in the evenings, the sound of their shared breaths as they lay beside each other in bed. But now, the silence in the house felt like an oppressive weight, one that he couldn't escape. It seemed to wrap around him, clinging to his every movement, his every thought. The echoes of their love, their laughter, their shared memories, all of it felt like a distant, unreachable dream. The evening stretched on, the shadows of the night creeping across the rooms as James found himself pacing. He hadn't expected to feel so lost. He had expected anger, frustration, maybe even relief. But all he felt was emptiness. The kind of emptiness that gnawed at his insides and left him questioning everything he had believed to be true. he had tried to fill the void by making phone calls, checking messages, anything to keep his mind occupied, but nothing seemed to quiet the storm raging inside him. It was as if the more he tried to push the feelings aside, the louder they grew. He thought about Lily, about the choice she had made, and how she had walked away. He thought about the man she had left him for. Was he the answer to everything she had been looking for? And if so, what had he missed? What had he overlooked? The question hung in the air like a cloud, heavy and suffocating. Eventually, he found himself sitting on the couch, staring at the TV but not seeing it. He was stuck in a loop of memories, each one a painful reminder of the connection that once existed between him and Lily. They had been so close, so in tune with one another, or so he thought. But now, as he tried to piece together the fragments of their past, he realized that maybe he had never truly understood her. Maybe he had never truly seen her. His thoughts turned to the moments before she had left. The late nights at the office, the days when he came home late, tired and distracted, only to find her already asleep, her back turned to him. It had become a routine, one that he had thought would pass. He had assumed that once the project was over, everything would return to normal. But what if normal wasn't enough anymore? What if it had never been enough? The sound of a car outside broke his reverie, and for a moment, he thought it was her. Coming back, maybe with some explanation, some reason to make it all better. But when he looked out the window, he saw nothing. Just the empty street stretching out into the night. The world outside continued, indifferent to his pain, to the wreckage of his life. A knock at the door startled him, and his heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if it was hope or dread that surged through him as he stood up to answer. Maybe Lily had come back, ready to talk, to explain. But when he opened the door, it wasn't her. Instead, standing on his doorstep was a neighbor he barely recognized. A woman from a few houses down, someone he had only exchanged pleasantries with in passing. "James, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. James blinked, momentarily stunned by her presence. He hadn't expected anyone, let alone someone who seemed so removed from the turmoil that had consumed his life. Yeah, I'm fine," he managed to say, even though he knew it wasn't true. What's going on? I haven't seen Lily around, and I thought I'd check on you. I know you two were close." Her words were kind, but they stung. "Is everything okay?" The question felt like a dagger to his heart. He looked down at the ground, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. He hadn't wanted anyone to know, especially not his neighbors. He didn't want to talk about Lily, about the rupture in his life that was still too raw to put into words. But there was something in the woman's gaze, a quiet, understanding, sorrow that made him feel as though he could no longer hide from the truth. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's not okay." The woman nodded, her eyes softening with empathy. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know it's none of my business, but I thought you might need someone to talk to. You don't have to go through this alone." James felt a wave of gratitude mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite name. He hadn't expected anyone to reach out, to offer support. The isolation he had felt over the last few days had made him retreat inward, away from everyone and everything. But now, with this woman standing in front of him, her kindness cut through the fog of his own self-pity. "Thanks," he muttered, still struggling to find the right words. "I appreciate it." The woman gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Take care of yourself, okay? And if you need anything—" She trailed off, her words unspoken but understood. James nodded mutely, the weight of the conversation leaving him feeling both exposed and strangely lighter. After a moment, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night as quietly as she had come. James closed the door, his heart still, heavy but oddly moved. It wasn't much, but for the first time in days he felt a small spark of connection. Someone had noticed his pain. Someone had cared enough to reach out. He sank back onto the couch, the silence in the house now less suffocating. The evening stretched out before him, but it didn't seem as unbearable anymore. For the first time in a long while, he realized that even in the darkest moments, there were still small moments of light, people who offered kindness, even when they didn't have all the answers. The night was far from over, and James knew that he still had a long road ahead of him. But for the first time, he understood that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required time, patience, and the willingness to reach out, even when it felt impossible. The phone call came at 11:47 p.m., just as James had settled into a fragile, restless sleep. The sharp ring sliced through the quiet of the night, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. His heart raced, the weight of the past days still hanging heavily over him. He had been living in a haze, a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The uncertainty of the future made every passing hour feel like a battle he wasn't prepared for. He fumbled for his phone, expecting it to be a business call or some random number trying to sell him something. But when he saw the name on the screen, Lily, his chest tightened. A wave of emotions flooded him. It had been days since he'd heard from her, and in those days, he had convinced himself that any contact would only hurt more. The letter, the empty house, the silence, all of it had felt like a death. The idea of reopening that wound was terrifying. But this was Lily. She was the woman he had loved, the woman he had promised to build a future with. For a long moment, he just stared at the phone, the decision to answer weighing on him. He could feel the weight of the past week, the confusion, the betrayal, the longing, and yet, in the pit of his stomach, there was something else, a thread of hope. The same hope that had led him to think he could fix everything with one grand gesture when he returned. But now he knew better. Now it was about healing. It was about understanding. Finally, he swiped the screen, his voice barely audible as he said, "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end before Lily's voice broke through. It wasn't the calm, steady voice he remembered. It was shaky, uncertain, filled with an undercurrent of something he couldn't quite place. "James," she whispered, her voice heavy with guilt. "I didn't think you'd answer." "Why wouldn't I?" His response came out harsher than he intended. His emotions, kept in check for days, surged to the surface. The anger, the hurt, the confusion. He couldn't hide them anymore. Lily let out a soft sigh, her voice trembling. "I don't know. I guess I thought you'd be better off without me. I thought you'd want to forget everything." A lump formed in James's throat. "How could I forget you, Lily? How could I forget the years we spent together, the life we built? Her silence lingered on the other end, and James could almost hear her internal struggle. She had left him, but the guilt, the weight of her decision, was still gnawing at her. He had expected her to move on with ease, to find someone else and build a new life. But the rawness in her voice now told him a different story. I don't know how to explain this, Lily continued, her voice cracking. But I never wanted to hurt you. It wasn't just about the other person. It was about me. I felt like I was losing myself. I didn't recognize who I had become. And every time I looked at you, I felt like I was falling further away from the woman I used to be. James swallowed hard, his heart aching. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, to tell her how much she had hurt him. But what Lily said made sense in a way he hadn't expected. He had been so focused on the idea of what was, the years they had spent together, the life they had built, that he hadn't seen the cracks forming beneath the surface. And I didn't see it, he said softly, his words heavy with regret. I didn't see you slipping away. I thought I was doing what was best for us, but I was so caught up in my own world that I didn't stop to ask if you were okay. If we were okay. There was a long silence before Lily spoke again, her voice tinged with sorrow. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I left, I'd finally be able to breathe again. But now, I just feel empty. Like I made the wrong choice. James closed his eyes, the weight of her words sinking deep into him. He had never considered that. In his mind, leaving him had been a decision made out of coldness, out of betrayal. But now he saw it differently. She hadn't left because she no longer loved him. She had left because she had been suffocating, caught in a life that no longer felt like hers. I'm sorry, James, Lily whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't know how to fix it, so I ran. And now, I don't know how to come back from this. I don't know if I can. Her words were a confession, a raw admission of her pain and her fear. James felt a strange mix of emotions. A part of him wanted to reach through the phone, to pull her back, to fix everything. But another part of him understood that the only way forward was not through fixing what had been broken, but through healing. They both needed time. They both needed to figure out who they were without the other. I don't know what to do either, he said, his voice steady but filled with vulnerability. I'm angry, and I'm hurt, and I feel so lost without you. But I'm also understanding that we both need to figure out who we are now, not as a couple, but as individuals. Lily was quiet, and for a moment, James wondered if she had hung up. But then he heard her soft, shaky breath on the other end of the line. I don't know what's next, James, but I'm not running anymore. I'm facing it. And maybe, in time, we can find a way back to each other. Or maybe we won't. But I don't want to keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words wash over him. The future was uncertain, and for the first time in days, he realized that he couldn't control it. But maybe, just maybe, the first step toward healing was letting go of the need for answers. Letting go of the need for everything to be okay right now. Take care of yourself, Lily, James whispered. I'm here when you're ready. But only if you're ready. "I will be," she replied, her voice soft but filled with a quiet hope. The call ended, and James sat in the dark silence of his living room, the weight of the conversation settling deep within him. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if they could rebuild what had been lost. But, for the first time in days, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt like he could breathe again. And for now, that was enough. The days that followed the phone call with Lily were a blur of conflicting emotions. James tried to push through the pain, focusing on his work, but everything seemed to lose its meaning without her. The house felt colder, the silence more profound. He had spent years building a life for them, for their future, but now, that future seemed impossibly distant. He knew they had both made mistakes, but accepting that everything had changed was more difficult than he had imagined. One evening, after another long day of trying to escape the heaviness of his thoughts, James stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom, his reflection staring back at him. He didn't recognize the man he saw. The weariness in his eyes, the dark circles under them, and the tightness in his jaw spoke of exhaustion. Not just physical, but emotional. He had spent so long running from the truth of their crumbling marriage, pretending that everything would work itself out if he worked hard enough. But now, as he stood there alone, he realized that the answers wouldn't come from more work, more success, or more distractions. They would come from within, if he was willing to face the pain, to confront the truth of who he had become. As the days wore on, James found himself reflecting more on his own actions, his own role in the unraveling of their relationship. He had always prided himself on being a provider, on making sure that everything was taken care of. But in doing so, he had neglected the most important part of their lives, their emotional connection. His dedication to his work, his ambition to climb higher and higher, had slowly pushed Lily further away. She had tried to reach him, tried to express her needs, but he hadn't listened. He had been too focused on what he thought was right, too caught up in his own world to see her slipping away. It wasn't an easy realization to come to terms with, but it was the first step. The first step toward healing, toward understanding that while the past couldn't be undone, there was still a chance for growth, for both of them. But even as he began to accept his responsibility, another wave of doubt hit him. Was it too late? Lily had left, and she had made it clear in their conversation that she needed time. She had confessed her need to find herself again, to rediscover who she was without the weight of their relationship. James understood that. Now, he understood that this wasn't just about their marriage falling apart. It was about both of them finding their own identities, something that had gotten lost along the way. He had always known how to be a husband, how to be a provider, but he had never truly known how to be just himself, apart from everything else. And now, with the space between them, he had to face that uncomfortable truth. One night, after another long day of reflection, James found himself standing at the kitchen counter, the light dim above him. He stared at the half-empty coffee mug that sat in front of him, the steam rising from it in delicate spirals. It was the same mug Lily had always used, the one with the chipped edge that she had insisted on keeping. He hadn't realized how much he had come to associate the simple act of making coffee together with comfort, with routine, with her. The thought of it, of them, hit him like a wave. He missed her. He missed the little moments, the sound of her laughter, the way she would roll her eyes at his bad jokes, the way they would talk late into the night about everything and nothing. He missed the way they fit together, the way they had once been inseparable. But he also knew that those moments weren't enough. He couldn't keep holding on to what had been. He couldn't keep living in the past. James took a deep breath, his chest tight. But what if she never comes back? That question had been haunting him ever since their conversation, but it wasn't the answer he needed to focus on anymore. Instead, he turned his thoughts inward. What if, in this time apart, they both found the space to grow, to heal, not just together, but individually? As the night wore on, James made a decision. He was no longer going to wait for Lily to return and fix everything. He had to start fixing himself. He needed to rediscover who he was, to reconnect with the parts of himself that had gotten lost in the whirlwind of life, of expectations, of work. He had to learn how to be whole again, not because Lily might come back, but because he needed to be whole for himself. The next morning, he woke up early and made the decision to go for a run. It was something he hadn't done in years, something that had once been a part of his life but had slowly faded away. As he laced up his sneakers, a small, quiet sense of anticipation stirred within him. This was a step forward. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The cold morning air hit him as he stepped outside, and he breathed it in, feeling the sharpness of it fill his lungs. He began to run, slowly at first, but then faster as his body found a rhythm. It wasn't about running away from his problems, but running toward something new. Something that could help him regain his sense of self. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, James felt the weight of the past week begin to lift, just a little. It wasn't a miracle, and it certainly wasn't an easy fix, but it was progress. He wasn't moving backward anymore. He was moving forward, even if it was just one step at a time. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow across the street, James felt a shift inside him. He wasn't sure what the future held. He wasn't sure if he and Lily would ever find their way back to each other. But he knew that, for the first time in a long time, he was starting to heal. And that was enough for now. It was enough to take. This first step, toward himself, toward growth, toward whatever the future might bring,